This is my 2003 Land Rover Defender. It's my daily driver and I use it almost every day for my work. It was around 4 PM on a Sunday afternoon when I tried to start my Defender, and this was the sound that I was greeted with. The previous day when I was driving I noticed a little bit of a stutter, but I just thought I had selected the wrong gear. When I heard this noise coming from the fuel pump, I instinctively knew it was the fuel pump struggling or having a blockage of some description. I checked the fuel filter and various other things before biting the bullet and deciding to remove the fuel filter from the fuel tank for inspection. After exposing the fuel pump, the first thing I do is unclip the 4 pipes that are in the top of the filter. Next, I unclip the power supply plug. I make sure the unclipped pipes and plug are out of the way before I undo the ring that is holding the spring-loaded fuel pump in place. I undo the ring by engaging a punch with one of the raised notches on the top of the ring and hitting gently with a hammer. Then it's just a case of manhandling and manoeuvring the fuel pump out of the fuel tank itself. When I initially cut this hole to access the fuel pump, I perhaps should have made it a little bit bigger because I've made it a little bit awkward for myself here. This section reminds me a little bit of a scene from Alien. I eventually get the fuel pump free of the tank and then just let it sit and rest for a minute while the residual fuel drains out of it back into the tank. As you can see here, there's some sort of sludge that's on the gauze that's on the bottom of the fuel pump. When I rubbed it, it was kind of slimy, greasy. I decided that I would remove this outer casing, and then when I did, there was yet another gauze or filter at the bottom, and that was absolutely choked with this sludge or slime. So I got some WD-40 and a couple of old paintbrushes and proceeded to clean off all the sludge and the slime. Once I was happy they were reasonably clean, I set about putting the fuel pump back together. That's when I noticed even more sludge on another filter. So I stripped the fuel pump down even further and cleaned it. This was a bit dodgy because I had to use the vehicle the next day for work. So after cleaning it as best as I could, I reassembled it and put it back in the tank and hoped for the best. You can see here just how much the sludge had got into this particular filter, and this was after going through the main gauze. I really have no idea where all this sludge has come from. My Defender is 2003, so all I can think is it's built up over time, but this isn't the original fuel pump by any means. I used various brushes and brake cleaner to try and get this clean, but it just wasn't having it. I eventually realised that this particular filter detached from the bottom of the pump, which made life a little bit easier. Nevertheless, it still took a lot of cleaning and scrubbing. It was still a little bit difficult to clean, but I just persevered and got it as clean as I possibly could before reassembling it all. After doing all this, I wasn't sure whether the pump would actually run again, and if it did run, I don't know how reliable it would be, so I immediately ordered a new one. At this point I was thinking this sludge must have built up over time, so if I got the pump reasonably clean it would last me until I had a chance to get the new pump. Before attempting to insert the pump back into the tank, I used a cloth to hold the pipework back so that it wouldn't get underneath the flange as I pushed the pump down into the tank. Here I'm fitting the rubber washer onto the ring at the top of the tank. This rubber lips over the top and the bottom of the ring to prevent it from falling into the tank when you're putting the new pump in. At this point my aim was to get the pump as clean as possible and then run it until the tank was almost empty. I would then clean the tank out thoroughly and then fit the new pump. These plastic parts on the pump seem to assemble and disassemble quite easily. What makes it difficult is that everything's covered in diesel. Although this looks very messy in the video, I was trying my hardest to keep things as clean and tidy as possible. Refitting the pump back into the tank proved to be a little bit difficult for me. Here I just had to take the pump back out of the tank to check that I had fitted the large rubber washer correctly to the ring at the top of the tank. As I said before, the large rubber washer has a lip on it which helps it stay in place whilst refitting the fuel pump. So to refit the pump, you have to push the pump down into the tank against the pressure of the spring, whilst trying to get the fixing ring to catch and engage with the thread, as it were. I know there's probably a special tool for doing this, but why buy that when I can struggle? Most of the time it's a real pleasure working on my Defender. However, when I've got time against me and it's a surprise and not planned maintenance, I find it a little bit stressful. So the secret is keep the pump pushed down while you get that ring engaged, otherwise it'll just keep popping up and fighting against you. Every time the pump comes out of the tank, it brings with it the rubber washer that makes the seal at the top. So every time you have to remove the rubber washer from the pump itself and refit it into the top of the tank. Once I had got the fixing ring to catch and engage with the thread, as it were, I got a hammer and punch and just tapped the ring home until it was reasonably tight. As I said before, I know there is probably a tool for doing this job, but in the heat of the moment and in an emergency, as it were, I just didn't have time to try and get one. I've got to say, this is an absolute struggle to get this pump in at this point. Once again, I've taken it out so that I can just check the sealing ring, because the last thing I want to do is put the locking ring on and find there's a leak. So once again I put the pump back in the tank. All this time it's just getting messier and messier. In fact, I've made a right dog's dinner of this job. I've had the pump in and out a couple of times and there is diesel absolutely everywhere now. The job has not been made any easier by the hole that I've cut. If I was to give anybody any advice about doing this job, I'd say cut a much bigger hole. Give yourself plenty of room to get your hand in. In fact, I'll put this on my job list. I'm going to make this hole tidier at some stage and larger, and perhaps get some more checker plate and tidy it right up. With this job I couldn't help but get diesel absolutely everywhere. So the next job after fitting the pump back in place was to retrieve the pipes that go into the top of the fuel pump, reinsert them in the correct order, and then just have a general clean-up. This is an absolute mess. All I really want to do now is just get the pump in, get cleaned up and get it working. Here I'm just checking the breather tube on the tank to make sure it's clear. I just need to get any diesel that's lying around soaked up, because I can't stand the smell of it constantly, and the more I can clear up, the faster the smell will dissipate. Once I've had a bit of a clean up, it's just a case of retrieving the pipework and reconnecting them. From left to right, it's white, green, blue, black, and then just put the plug on. But as you can see here, I've a right old game trying to retrieve them and plug them back into the pump. I think as time is getting on, it's a case of more haste, less speed. So I eventually get it all done and all reconnected. And I'm pleased to report that the vehicle ran perfectly for the next week, but unfortunately that wasn't the end of my troubles. But that's for another story, another video, which I will put out in the next couple of days. But if you've watched this torture to the end, I thank you. And if you haven't already, I wondered if you would consider subscribing. It is free and it gives incentive to produce more video. Thank you. So that's it. I suppose all's well that ends well. Until the next time.